I said good evening, everybody, and everybody went. but anyway, I definitely want to say good evening, everybody. My name is Steve Prince, and of course I'm the visiting artist here, and have the exhibition that's out in the room outside of us and so forth. And I wanted to do this talk this evening because I wanted to contextualize the work to give everyone a little bit of a bite, a deeper bite into the work, and so you begin to understand some of the symbols and the symbology that I've developed for the work and so forth. So I'm going to tell a story to you, and I'm going to show it through images, and I'm going to tell it in threefold. One story that I'm going to begin with is a personal one, and it's a foundational story about how I got here to do the work that I do. Secondly, I'm going to tell a story about what is the philosophy that underlies my work. And then thirdly, I'm going to go into the work, the actual work, and some of the pieces that are not, all the pieces I have in this presentation, or just a few, are not in the show. And then I'm going to talk to you about a few pieces that are some of the works that I've done communally and how I've gone outreach with the same philosophy and the ideas. And then we're going to get up and we're going to go out there and I'm going to talk about three pieces that are in exhibition. Now, of course, I'm not going to just only talk about three pieces. If you have any questions about any of the pieces, I'm more than happy to engage with you and share with the audience about some of the work. Okay? So that's the basic outline of what we're going to do. But before we do that, I was hoping that we could do a little call and response song. Everybody ready to sing tonight? You ready to sing? Yeah. You said show my man in the back said yes, I'm ready to do this. All right? That's all I need. I just need I need a few confirmations. Some people say, I don't want to sing that loud. But it's all good. All right, you all ready? Say, hail Jesus, you're my king.
Hail Jesus, you're my king.
Your life brings me to sing.
Your life brings me to sing.
I will praise you all my days.
I will praise you all my days.
You're perfect in all your ways.
You're perfect in all your ways.
Say, hail Jesus, you're my Lord.
Hail Jesus, you're my Lord.
I will obey your word.
I will obey your
I
word.
want to see your kingdom come.
Want to see your kingdom come.
Not my will, but yours be done.
Not my will, but yours be done.
Say, glory, glory to the Lamb.
Glory, glory to the Lamb.
He will take us into the land.
He will take me to the land.
We will conquer in your name.
We will conquer in your name.
And proclaim that Jesus reigns.
And proclaim that Jesus
Say,
reigns.
hail, hail, Lion of Judah.
Hail, hail, Lion of Judah.
How wonderful you are.
How wonderful you are.
Say, hail, hail, Lion of Judah.
Hail, hail, Lion of Judah.
How powerful you are.
How powerful you
Say,
are.
how wonderful you are.
How wonderful you
Say,
are.
how beautiful you are.
How beautiful you are.
Yes, you are.
Hallelujah.
I love it. We can do that all night. We can just change the whole art show. We just have a Christmas party up in here. All right? So we can flip the script, but I'm hoping that the praise will continue, and I want to make sure I set the atmosphere right in terms of having us do a moment of praise, because that is what the work is out of. It's out of that same place of praise. We may see hurt, we may see the damages that we have done to each other in this world, but what I also see here is the embodiment of the hope. I see the embodiment of the renewal. I see the embodiment of what we must do as a collective body to go against these damages that have been rendered to all of us on this planet.
Yes.
That's the hope that I'm speaking of. And that's what I want you to see in this work, hopefully. So let me consecrate us with a little bit of prayer, and then I'll move right into the presentation. Dear Heavenly Father, Lord, I thank you for your grace and your mercy. I thank you for this day and allowing me to come here before your people to share a reflection of the kingdom through the visual arts. Oh, Heavenly Father, I pray that you consecrate everything that I say out of my mouth, and that it would not bring harm or offense to any of the people that are here. I pray that what comes out of my mouth will be an edification of you and be a reflection of that which is good and which is wholesome out of the kingdom to be spread to each one of our hearts. I pray that the work will challenge each and every one of us, including myself, oh God. I submit myself to you. I submit this talk to you. I submit this day and this time, this hour and this second to you, oh God. And that everything that should be shared within the context of this room, that each person will carry it in their hearts and in their minds and in their spirits, and they will be what you have called us all to be, is to be evangelists of that word and to spread it to all the spaces and the places and all the barrios and the low places and the high spaces, that we are all to be able to be alike. And I pray, oh God, that we're able to live out James 1:21, where in your word you say, wherefore lay apart all filthiness and the superfluity of naughtiness, and receive with meekness the engrafted word which is able to save our souls. Oh Lord, I thank you for this day, for this day, again, that you made. And we all say together as we give you the utmost praise to you. Amen?
Amen.
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 I titled this show Sankofa Rebirth. Sankofa conceptually is this idea of going into one's past in order to move forward. And I put a colon there, and I call the show also Rebirth. You notice this is a dominance, because the rebirth requires something. The rebirth requires that one goes through and one sees where they have gone, then one goes back to a beginning space and they begin again. That's what's required within the context of that. I believe I was supposed to be using the mic. Am I okay? Everybody can hear me fine?
Yeah.
Good, okay. In New Orleans, Louisiana, where I was born and raised, I went to Xavier University of Louisiana for undergrad, and then I went to Michigan State for grad school. And at Xavier University, I concentrated in fine arts, and at Michigan State, I concentrated in printmaking and sculpture. And one of the things that I've done over the years is research a lot of the information about my hometown. And one of the things is called the bambula. The bambula is a circle dance that comes out of Africa. And a lot of the research that I've done is about this idea of the African turned American, or hence the African American. And in that context is one of the things that happened in terms of the time of slavery. A lot of the information was trying to be extracted from the African turned American to basically remove those things that came from Africa as it came into this American context. But the thing is, we know, and I can stand here and tell you that it did not get removed. That I still hold the keys, and I still hold the remnants, I still hold those elements that come from my African roots, and I brought them to America, and they are very much alive within the African American community. And one of the places where they lived really strongly was in New Orleans, in a place called Congo Square in New Orleans. And at this particular site, on Sundays, when the slaves had an opportunity to go out and have some free time, they would go and practice the rituals that came from Africa. Those same rituals are very much alive within a lot of the black church. Within the black church, when you see a person dancing and begin to break out and shout, or be covered or filled with the Holy Spirit, this is one of those spaces where that would take place. The circle dance would gather around and people began to dance, and sometimes they would dance to a frenzy, to a point where they would lose that sense of this self, or the human self here, and they'd be totally in attunement with the Holy Spirit. And you would see a person look like they were dancing like a bird. And that's, again, that's a symbol of the Holy Spirit flowing through them. Sometimes articles of clothing be removed from them, not as an act of lewdness. It will be removed because these are the things that weight us down on this earth. It would be an opportunity for them to get closer unto God. And if you pay attention to the African rhythms that have flowed to the African American rhythms, they're very earthly, they're grounded. They're here. They're in here, it's in there. And in the midst of that beat. And that's why the drum is so important in terms of the expression. I have been utilizing the funerary tradition coming out of New Orleans as the foundation or the flatbed of my work. So when you go out and see those works out in the gallery space, I want and hope that you understand where the work is coming from based on what I'm about to tell you. In New Orleans, in the jazz funeral, it's broken up into two parts. The first part of the jazz funeral is called the dirge. The dirge is the mournful tune that is played for the person who's being laid to rest. And so musicians will purposely play music to literally get you to cry and get you to pour out, to get you to express, to get it all out of your system. There's no time to be holding it back. There's no time to try to show some sense of, oh, I'm holding it together and I'm going to be good and strong about this. No, it's about letting it out. Get it out of your system. You understand that that's a part of our process as human beings. We experience loss. When we have someone that you love and that person goes away, that's not an easy thing to go through. It's a very difficult thing to process. But once the person is laid to rest and they go to the funerary site and they put the person in the ground, the music moves from being a mournful tune and it goes into a celebratory tune, which is called the second line. Now, some of you probably say, well, what's the first one? Excellent question, and I'm going to answer that in a second. I found that moment. But seriously, the first line is the family that's associated with the person that's being laid to rest. The second line is the community, the family, the other family that comes out to support. It's also a military concept or military construct. The first line is that one of the first line goes out there is the Marines, all right, or the Army, and then the ones that come back and back them up. That's the second line. The first line is our life here on earth. The second line is the afterlife, or the second life. That one in which we are in total community with God, the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. That's the second line. It has all those meanings built into that same concept. What a powerful, powerful construct in terms of New Orleans music and the traditions that are all inscribed in there. Piece is called Requiem for Brother John. This is a piece that I made for a person who was very instrumental in my life, and for the audience that was out there, and I did a little impromptu talk about one of the pieces. He was a person that was like a second father to me. His name was Jon Trott, and he was one of the reasons why I became an art professor, and one of the reasons why I continued to pursue being an artist, and that's him on the right-hand side of the compositional space. He passed away in 2007 of a condition called pulmonary fibrosis, which is like a hardening of the lungs. And I have the musicians in the above ground tombstones of New Orleans, because New Orleans is 6 feet below sea level, and the musician Louis Armstrong is playing, and the sounds are reverberating off of the horn as you see the musicians and people walking around the mother's arm draped around the son as he begins to cry out as she holds in her hand the obituary. Pay attention to that bottom right hand side of the compositional space for the next composition I'll share with you. Remember, once the person is laid to rest, the music changes. Everyone's spirit at the funeral changes. And when you hear the music, you will understand why. And then the bottom right hand side of the compositional space, Jon Trott is no longer here. What replaces him is the white dove, which is symbolic of the Holy Spirit. The square is a window or a portal from this world into the afterlife. Several symbols in terms of New Orleans are embedded in the composition. One of them, if it rains at your funeral, is considered to be a good omen. Hence the umbrella. The lightning bolt coming down. The trinity of poles. Real subtle symbolism embedded within the image. And telling you a story of the dirge and of the second line. The rebirth after Hurricane Katrina. And so in looking at this image, and looking at those concepts of the dirge and of the second line, it is my hope that I begin to share with you that if we think of the dirge differently, not necessarily related to a funeral, let's think of the dirge as those things that we have to deal with on a daily basis, whether it be on a micro level or the macro level. A micro level is those things that we have to internally deal with in our own life, in our own personal journey, our own personal walk. The macro issues are those ones that happen across the lines, across the gender lines, across the communal lines, across the quote-unquote racial lines. That's those big macro issues. It is my belief that if we are going to get to a second line, that we got to go through the dirge and we got to do it together. That's part of what I've been talking about with the Sankofa is looking back with the hope of us moving forward together, and that we all can receive that second line, that we all can rejoice. That's part of our journey, I believe. Name of this piece is called In the Line of Fire. Now, one thing I didn't tell you is that majority of the works in the show is made of a material called linoleum. Linoleum is a floor tile-like material. It's pretty soft and pretty pliable, especially in the warmth of this room. If it gets really cold, like it does here in Chicago, this gets really brittle and can snap. But because it's kind of warm in here, it's pretty pliable. So what I do is, I make an intricate drawing on the surface of the block, and then I use very sharp tools that are in shapes of V's and shapes of U's, and I cut into the negative space around my positive lines. Then I take a roller, which is flat, and I roll ink across the surface of the block. I take paper and set it on top of the block. Then I run it through a press or apply some type of pressure to it. Sometimes I use a steamroller, and that's when I'm working really big. That's my really big ones. None of these out here were done with a steamroller. Those pieces I did not bring here. But I run it through a press, I pull the paper back, and that's how you get a print. Now, as you know what a print does, it gets the reverse of this. So any letters and words you see in the compositions, I had to carve those backwards in order so that they come out the right way. My designs used to look the opposite way, now they're looking the other way. Now, what I learned in art school was a good design should hold up in any direction. It should hold up because you work with some of the basic elements and principles of design. Line, value, texture, repetition, and all those kind of terms and terminology that I learned over the years and that I picked up from so many different culture groups that create art. So that's embedded there. I wanted to take a pause moment to talk to you about the process. This is about actual size of the print that I made. So everything you see white is something I carved away from the block. So you can understand the labor that's involved in terms of making it. I call this piece In the Line of Fire because we can think about that in a couple of ways. In the line of fire is typically a terminology that's used in military or the police. One that's in the line of fire is one about to be shot. But from a Christian point of view, no. Ain't no guns in there. We're talking about the Holy Spirit fire. That's the line of fire that stood in the face of people trying to stop immigration from taking place. This is the Norfolk 17 African American youth that left the middle schools and the high schools, and they entered into the public school systems down in Norfolk, Virginia. But something interesting happened because Governor Allman at the time shut down all the schools throughout Virginia, and none of the kids were going to school for almost a year. Yeah. But something interesting also happened because we need to look back. Remember I told you about the Sankofa. And the looking back is to know that that was one of the greatest moments of white flight that took place in our American history in terms of our education systems. And when you say, what do you mean white flight? White flight meaning that a large proportion of white people left the public sector and went to the private sector, and one of the sectors they went to, of course, were the Catholic schools. So in the 60s, that's when you had the burst of all these people going to those schools, and it really picked up. I made a statement about that at the top middle of the compositional space. It's not a blanket statement. It's not to say that all white people did this. It's not to say all white people, because that's not the way history works. That's not the way we live. It's far more complex than that. It's far more layered than that, which I'm going to reveal in some other parts of this piece. They did a hear no evil, speak no evil, see no evil. Instead of showing pity, which is symbolically based on the word piety, which means pity, they turned away and they did not live up to duty. Up at the top left, there was a series of schools across the South called the Rosenwald schools. Y'all heard of a guy named Julius Rosenwald? Who was Julius Rosenwald? He's responsible for something really major right here in the city, Chicago. That's why I put this piece up in here.
Was he an architect?
Nope, that's not him.
Sears.
Bam. I believe in collective knowledge. Someone in the room always knows. I'm serious. Everywhere I go, I've traveled all over the country, and I ask these same questions, and someone in the room knows. And that's the thing. I love the power of knowledge and information. Sears, Roebuck, he was one of the founders of Sears, one of the owners. Rosenwald also was a good friend of a guy named Booker T. Washington. Booker T. Washington is the guy who started a school called Tuskegee University down in Tuskegee, Alabama. Booker T. Washington went to Julius Rosenwald and said, yo man, put your money where your mouth is. The schools that the black kids are going to are terrible. They need something better to go to and so forth. And Julius Rosenwald said, bam, I'll do it. He put his money where his mouth was, and he built a series of schools across the South that gave the black kids a little bit better space for them to go to for school, gave them better books, gave them better places to have education. But because the integration took place, the kids left those, many of them left those schools and entered into the public school system, and they came in amidst the jeers and the racial epithets and the death threats and all those things coming on them. But the African Americans came in with their culture, they came in with their economics, they came in with their spirituality, they came in with a song upon their sleeves. Lift every voice and sing till earth and heaven ring. They came in with all these different things, but they also came with the covering of the Holy Spirit, which is symbolically layered right here at the bottom of the compositional space, because the dove was up above and showed its shadow upon them as they entered into these schools. And on the clothing, there's a target, some ways in which those kids were targeted, but it was nullified, which goes all the way back to this book by Raymond Dobar and Jacqueline Tobin called Hidden in Plain View. And in that book, he postulates this idea that the slave and the abolitionists conspired together to create a secret code system which they put into the quilts and so forth that gave them a means to know how to move from one space to the next. Now, some historians have contested that history and said that it's not true, but they do not have substantial information to say that it wasn't. So therefore, it is. So, with that, the hourglass pattern at the bottom of this particular space is the little note was time. It was time for them to enter in. It was time for them to challenge those systems and come into those schools. And I have at the very bottom right-hand side of it, because this piece is part of a series called the Urban Epistles. And epistle, by definition, means a letter that one's writes to someone else. So I put stamps on the pieces because they are open letters, all for us to read. And the stamp is a Thurgood Marshall stamp. He was the guy that was one of the leaders in terms of who fought those cases to encourage those integration within the schools. He was the person who put his life on the line. But something else interesting in the composition, it's right over here. There's a guy who has a shirt on, he has a cufflink on it. And the cufflink has two initials on there, and the initials are ST. ST was for a guy who was a senator, and he was a senator for over 50 years, I believe. And he was really staunch about, no integration. Matter of fact, he put a filibuster on the line. He's like, no integration, no, stop that. No Negroes involved in the school systems. No, keep them out. That's what he was saying. What's it, what? Strom Thurmond. Interesting. Let's keep digging at Strom Thurmond. Something interesting came out about Strom Thurmond when he passed away.
Yes, he had a daughter.
He what? Oh my goodness, he had a daughter.
Yep.
Oh, what? What's? I mean, so many people have daughters and
Was she
sons.
black?
Oh my goodness.
Yeah.
Wow. Dang, that's deep. Oh my goodness. Wow, this story really got juicy. Yes, that's part of what I'm trying to expose, guys. This man had not only a black daughter, he had a relationship with the black daughter. He didn't just have her and just kind of just go off in the distance. He kept a strong relationship with her, talked to her regularly. I had a woman I spoke at New York at the Riverside Church, the historical church. I spoke there about 3 months ago. And I did this lecture there, and the woman said, I knew his daughter. And he would come to the campus in a black limo to pick her up. That blew my mind. I was like, whoa, that's the first time I heard this. You know, it was like, wow, that's some deep stuff. But yes, he came there, he paid for her to go to HBCU. For those who do not know what HBCU is, it's a historically black college and university. Over 100 of them across the United States. And this man sent his daughter there and kept a relationship with her. But something interesting about it is that meanwhile, he kept this other lifestyle that was saying no to this, but then he kept this other life, baby, what do you need? Wow, we're talking about double consciousness. That's some heavy stuff. That's what Du Bois talked about. But in here, it's really interesting because I'm hoping that we can peel back the history and we can get down to the depth, the depth parts of it, to get down to the bone and the marrow of it, and we can begin to understand something deeper about the story, and it's not just black and white. Don't get caught up in the pictures that they're black and white, but I'm using this medium, which has been used for centuries, as a means of just telling the story. That's why I use it. And I use it because I have the ability to make multiples. I'm able to disseminate a message. I'm trying to use the art very much like the disciples used the word and spreading it. It's going out into the spaces and sharing this message. That's what this artwork is about.
Amen.
This piece here is called a jazz song with a lot of blue notes. Y'all recognize that guy here? Especially, again, I put this piece in there purposely because of where I'm at. I'm here in Chicago.
All right.
And this person here came back to here, and this is where his museum is going to end up. His presidential museum is being built probably right now someplace. I know they already got the land picked out. They already have the pictures and everything worked out for it. But I have multiple stories being told in here. Today I'm going to tell just one of the stories in here, which is right here in his leg. And it's a story of chattel slavery. It is a story that well into the 60s, because of Jim Crow South, historical information down there, a black woman was not considered a woman on the books in terms of the laws. If a black woman were raped, she was not raped. How can one be raped and not raped? Because she was not considered to be a human being. They didn't have laws to protect her. And this is well into the 60s that was taking place. But then I asked the question again, this just really confounds me to think of this. So if she's not considered to be a human, she's considered to be an animal. If a person has a sexual relationship with this quote-unquote animal, what is that called?
Bestiality.
So if this man has a sexual relationship with her, shouldn't he be going to jail based on the laws that he should be going to jail for bestiality? No. It was all these multiple standards and laws are written and made and to fit and to support whoever they need to support. They can get changed, they can get thrown out, courts can be made, they can be broken down, whatever. It's all an exercise in many instances. And what I reveal in there, which comes from Zora Neale Hurston's book, there's a line in her book, she says, the nigger woman is the mule of the world as far as I can see. And I created this series many years ago dealing with that line. It's about the ways in which black people had to go away from this, had to push past these constructions being looked upon as an animal, being less than human, to be looked upon as a human being. And she's going from a mule, and she's transforming into this woman who's carrying this child that belongs to this master. But then you begin to think about, again, the complexity of history. The famous quote dealing with Barack Obama, yes, we can. But they also put in there, I am a man, which is a quote that was right around the time that was on the hinge point when 1968, when Martin Luther King was assassinated in Memphis, Tennessee, when he died on the balcony of the Lorraine Motel. But I also put something there, and I can spell, but I put SS right there. Some people know what the SS is relates to the Jewish cycles, but in the American context, SS will be marked in the right hand of a white abolitionist if they were caught helping a black person to freedom. The SS stood for slave still. And you would shake one of their hands and you would know that they were sympathizer for black people and trying to break down the institution of slavery. They marked them, they branded them in their hand. That's just part of this piece. This piece here is part of it's my prodigal son triptych that I made. This is the first one of the 3. And then the prodigal son triptych that I created, I told it through a hip hop lens, not to demonize hip hop. But I told it through a hip hop lens because if you think about the music and the beats and the rhythms, the structure of the piece is built off of that. I want you to feel the beat, the rhythm. You gotta get into it. You gotta know that the rhythm is in there. It's all built in. I'm a child of the 80s. I came out of that. You know, boom. And the music was playing, boy. We were bobbing everywhere. Big baggy pants, real bright colors. We were just showing out all kind of ways, making our parents mad. I'm not the only generation to do that. Because all y'all did the same thing. And so inside this piece here, I have this representation of the man sitting there with his girlfriend, his arm draped around her. And one of the things that I've done for many years, I taught in the high schools, and I work with a lot of kids, a lot of youth, and so forth. And in work with them, I would basically begin to talk to them about the music which they were listening to, what they were consuming. And as I begin to talk about what they were consuming, it's like they're trying to eat a TV dinner while you're watching TV, but the TV is actually eating them.
Okay.
That's why the fork and knife is in his head. The food is being inverted. The confusing signs within the clothing. Is it S-A-V-E? No, that says S-E-X. Or is that S-I-M? No, that's L-O-V-E. No, that's L-U-S-T. No, that's L-O-S-T. Oh, that's H-O-P-E. No, that says D-O-P-E. If you're looking for words here, I'm messing with you now. There's no words there. But there's a word here. It says feel on her breast, and ways in which the music begins to be codified in such a way that it creates these damaging lines. And music has it in all forms. It's not embedded. It's not located to hip hop. It's in many different musical forms and structures where they got the things that are replicating these issues that are going on. The second piece is called exit wounds, and exit wounds is what one sustains when the bullet goes in and goes out the other side. But in this context, I'm not talking about an exit wound in that context. I'm talking about the exit wound that the prodigal son had when he left the father's home and he asked for the inheritance prematurely, and he went out into the world and he did not have the protection of the family or the father's house where it protected around him. He takes the superficiality of money and he squanders it away, and it goes into a point where he's so far from the home that he goes into an internal prison within his mind that he begins to think that suicide is a way out. Because he believes that he has no way out. But I have answers within the composition that basically says, yes, you do have a way out. Because if I go back one image and you see the Father in the top left-hand side of the corner of the compositional space who has the Word, and the Holy Spirit is emanating out, and the Spirit of love is formed from his lips, you see that that one heart and that one Spirit is breaking through, going underneath his arm and going to his heart and giving him the help in which he's calling for, because the help is embedded within the Alpha and the Omega.
Amen.
And then the message that's for all of us. Your past may be stained, but your future is untouched.